Good evening, everyone. My name is Ike Pulver, and I am the director of the Saratoga Springs Public Library, and I am incredibly pleased to be hosting the very first Saratoga Book Festival event. Although I'd much rather be doing so in person and perhaps on a different topic, I really am thrilled to be kicking off the festival. It's my honor to introduce three people to you this evening. The first is Roger Rosenblatt, whose work has been published in 14 languages. Roger's the author of 5 New York Times Notable Books of the Year and 3 Times bestsellers, including the memoirs Kayak Morning, The Boy Detective, and Making Toast, which was originally an essay in The New Yorker. The Story I Am, a collection on writing and the writing life, came out in April, and Cold Moon on life, love, and responsibility will be out in October. Roger's also written 7 off-Broadway plays, notably the one-person Free Speech in America that he performed at the American Place Theater, and which was named one of the Times 10 Best Plays of 1991. Last spring at the Bay Theater in Sag Harbor, he performed and played piano in his play Lives in the Basement, Does Nothing, which will go to the Stoller Center for the Arts at Stony Brook and the Flea Theater in New York next year. He also wrote the screenplay for his best-selling novel Lapham Rising, which will star Frank Langelis, Dr. Channing, and Bobby Cannavale, and is currently in production. Roger's the Distinguished Professor of English and Writing at Stony Brook. He formerly held the Briggs Copeland Appointment in Creative Writing at Harvard, where he earned his PhD. Among his many honors are 2 George Polk Awards, the Peabody, and the Emmy for his essays at Time Magazine and on PBS, a Fulbright to Ireland, where he played on the Irish international basketball team, 7 honorary doctorates, the Kenyon Review Award for Lifetime Literary Achievement, and the President's Medal from the Chautauqua Institution for his body of work. We are incredibly pleased to have Roger with us this evening. Next, we have Erica Freudenberger, who works with libraries to create community-led change. As the outreach and engagement consultant at the Southern Adirondack Library System, she works with 34 member libraries, including the Saratoga Springs Public Library, and our communities to help people live their best lives. Most recently, Erica, along with Lori Weiss, the local history librarian at the Saratoga Springs Public Library, and Michelle Isopo, adult services and local history librarian at the Schuylerville Public Library, along with her colleague Jack Scott from the Southern Adirondack Library System, has been coordinating Leaving Our Fingerprints, documenting COVID-19 in the Southern Adirondacks, a project to collect firsthand accounts of life during the coronavirus in real time to create a people's history of COVID-19. The 34 member libraries of the Southern Adirondack Library System are working in tandem with our communities to document this historical pandemic. Everyone is welcome to participate in this collaborative effort to capture the impact of the virus in our region. And finally, certainly not least, is Ellen Beal, who is the founder and president of the Saratoga Book Festival. Ellen is a former international book editor and publishing executive at National Geographic Books, Berlitz Travel and Language Publishing, and Running Press, where she managed editorial development and multilingual publishing projects. While serving as a volunteer reading coach, she became deeply interested in promoting literacy and encouraging a love of reading, and she is the driving force behind the Saratoga Book Festival. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ellen, for a few words.
Thank you very much, Ike. I'm really very thrilled, as all of us are at Saratoga Book Festival, to launch, as Ike mentioned, our first virtual event. We're sad, of course, that we are not launching our actual first in-person book festival this year, but we are working on plans for 2021. And during this pause that we're all going through, we wanted to find ways to stay connected and also to make sure we were helping authors get their message out to all of you and to connect readers with each other. We are thrilled to partner with Saratoga Springs Public Library and Northshire Bookstore, who have been so important to us in launching the book festival. And we're thrilled to present to you Roger and Erica. For any of you who would like to volunteer, who would like to suggest ideas for future virtual events or possibly authors for next year, please visit us at Saratoga bookfestival.org, and of course we're on Facebook as well. So enjoy our authors and best of health to you. I hope you find the content useful to you as well.
So Roger, your most recent book, The Story I Am, Mad About the Writing Life, is a collection of snippets really about your love, your obsession, I would say, with writing and the writing life. Some of these are new, some are previously published, and it is getting rave reviews. Kirkus, who we all know to be snarky sometimes, has called it a warm-hearted testimony of gratitude and humility. And Jericho Brown, who just recently won the Pulitzer for Poetry, has called it a book that will inspire anyone to make the next sentence. Would you care to share a little bit of it with us?
I would, and share my gratitude for both of those generous comments. This is just the way the book begins. It'll give a sense that I think most writers can identify with. This is from Kayak Morning, a memoir I wrote some years ago. The characters in a novel I'm writing have lost control of themselves. The one-eyed hag has become a two-legged dog who travels solo in a red cart and plays bluegrass on the banjo. The gatekeeper has become a beekeeper. He's so out of things, he tries to open and close a gate made of bees he drinks. The hero of the piece is spread in 100 directions like the roots of an old tree. As for the villains, there are so many by now, I'd be better off yoking them under a single name. This is what happens when you do not pay attention to the novels you write. Oh yes, and death. A character called Death has stuck his Roman nose into the plot. He plays a vampire who needs a transfusion. It's a bad idea, don't you think, to give a transfusion to a vampire? I sometimes wish I owned a shop instead where I sold coconuts or orgeat d'art or bowie knives, anything but books. People would come to my shop to get what they want, and I would give them what they want, and we both would take satisfaction in the transaction. The trouble with writing is that you give people what they don't want, and by the time they realize they needed what you gave them, they have forgotten where your shop is located. You, meanwhile, never noticed them in the first place. You were intent on your work, which consists of patricide and theft. I read Cavafy the other day, cover to cover, for the sole purpose of robbing his grave. There's only one point to writing. It allows you to do impossible things. Sure, most of the time it's chimney sweeping or dung removal or plastering. A lot of times writing is plastering or caulking or pointing up the bricks. But every so often there is a moment in the dead of morning and everything is still as starlight and something invades your room like a bird that has flown through the window. And you are filled with as much joy and panic. And then you think, I can do anything.
Thank you for that. So I believe that the topic of tonight's conversation was inspired by when you and I talked a conversation that you had with your students about A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe, about the 1665 London bubonic plague epidemic. And although there's a little bit of a dispute about whether that should be considered fiction or nonfiction, I think most would agree that it's a novel rather than history or reportage. And that's certainly where we librarians classify it. And I guess that begs the basic question of what exactly is a journal, if you have thoughts on that.
Ike, are you asking me?
Yeah, I am, Roger. I'm sorry.
Okay. No. It's a wonderful question because that would mean it would I guess say that if it were fiction, then it might not be a journal, because then fiction would be a kind of journal or a journal that is just using the form. Defoe certainly wrote fiction. He based it on his uncle's notes, I think, and they were real. They were notes of actuality. I'm not sure the distinction makes much difference when you're reading. When there are some events, as the five of us too well know, as well as the wonderful audience for this book festival. There are some events that are so big and so preposterous, so unbelievable, that they seem like fiction when we're experiencing them. And this is one of them. This pandemic is one of them. So when somebody writes a journal of the pandemic, it's no doubt people would think you are making that up, but of course we're not making it up.
It does kind of feel like something that we've read a lot about in post-apocalyptic fiction, doesn't it? So,
absolutely.
So, Erica, much of Roger's work as a writing teacher, I imagine, and Roger, you can correct me if I'm wrong, involves providing prompts to your students. And in many ways, I think that the Leaving Our Fingerprints project feels like the mother of all prompts. It's a form, basically. Do you want to tell us about a bit about that project and its origins and its goals?
Absolutely. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to take over the screen and I'm actually going to share some pictures because I love stories, but I also love pictures.
Great.
So
let me give you the ability to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Okay. So, whoops, let me go back. There we go. So I've always really loved stories, and that shouldn't be surprising for somebody who's a librarian and a journalist. Words have always been my comfort zone. And stories resonate with me so profoundly that it's a collection of we tell and that we hear and that we absorb, and that's what gives us life and makes our world. And it's what obviously led me to become a librarian and a journalist and really enjoy the written word. But when it comes to the pandemic, it was really off my radar until about February when I was traveling home from Nashville. And while I was in the airport, the airlines began making a lot of changes. And they were asking people who used e-tickets on their phone, instead of putting their phone down on the counter, to hold it above or to read it off. And they were actually trying to get people to take paper tickets instead. And I thought, wow, that seems... that's when it started to strike me that we were in for something serious, and to think it was just a couple months ago and such a simpler time in our world. By the time I was working from home in mid-March, the pandemic had pretty much taken over my life. And one night as I was scrolling through Twitter, as I shouldn't do because I was procrastinating writing a story, I read a post that recommended keeping a journal, just to document what we were experiencing during this pandemic. And even though I'm the laziest diarist on the planet, the idea really stuck with me. I was also at the same time working on a story about how COVID-19 was affecting libraries across the country. And I can only equate trying to do that to wrestling water. Like each time I began to piece together a narrative, it would slip away and morph into an entirely new beast. There was just no way to get my arms around it. So as the pandemic continued and kind of moved from deep concern to like utter catastrophe, the interviews I was holding with people were taking on a very earnest quality, I would say. They became a lot more personal, and even though many of the people I was talking to were strangers, we would start with inquiring about people's health and employment status and their anxiety levels. And all of that made me start thinking more about that initial Twitter post that I saw. So at the Southern Adirondack Library System, we were holding meetings, weekly meetings, with the directors of our 34 libraries, just to kind of keep in touch with everyone and figure out what was going on. And it's my job to kind of think about how we can work with our communities. And I was struggling to really do that when our buildings were closed and when people were having to socially distant and be away from everybody. And then at the beginning of April, I thought about the power of stories and how transformative that can be, and the importance of story in dark times when we're looking for a light or a way forward. And I started thinking about what it would be like if we could help people tell their story of what it was like to be in the pandemic. And when I mentioned the idea at one of our weekly meetings, I found out that my epiphany, or what I thought was an epiphany, was not at all unique, right? Everybody else was thinking the same thing too, which was great. And including the Association of Public Historians of New York State, and who And so I went to their website. One of our directors, Barb Durkish at Lake George, said, "Hey, do you know about their initiative?" And they were talking about all the great journals that were kept during the Spanish flu in 1918 and how that's informed the work of scientists and epidemiologists and historians, and kind of gave us a lens through which to think about what we were doing. And that's when a number of our amazing library directors, including our fabulous host Ike, and Caitlin Johnson from the Schuylerville Library and Kathy Naftali from Crandall, had all been thinking about doing similar projects. So it was really just a matter of pulling it together. But there was a lot of talent to tap into. And so we kind of formed this merry band, which includes Lori Weiss, the local history librarian at Saratoga Springs, Michelle Isopo, who's from Schuylerville, and my wonderful colleague Jack Scott, who is a tech whiz. Began meeting to talk about how to capture very personal, unfiltered history of our friends and neighbors in real time and in their own words or images. Because as we were talking, Michelle, who has a teenage daughter, said that that her daughter and their friends didn't communicate as much through writing as they did through either memes or things like TikTok videos. And so we were thinking, how do we capture this new way of communicating? And so we created this very simple survey, really. It's about 20 questions. And this is our big reveal tonight. And I'll put the link in the chat box and hope everybody goes there and fills out the information. You don't have to do all 20 questions. You can pick and choose what you respond to. But what we're trying to do is to create a really robust resource for our communities to kind of have a chance to sit back and reflect on our collective experience while also preserving people's history for future generations. All the responses are anonymous. We ask for a first name and a last initial, and for people to identify where they live. And that's mostly just so we can share the information with local historians as well who might want to archive some of this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get out of this, maybe, or maybe not, or you can take it back. But I'll put the link to the project into the chat box. Thanks, Ike.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, Roger, I think that you might agree your best known books are memoirs. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on the distinction between journals and memoirs.
I must say I haven't thought of it that way, but I've written my last 8 books, have all been written as if they were journals. That is, they're written in segments and that mount on one another. My attempt, I don't know if I succeed, is like music. I play jazz piano, and I like the idea of the movements of the sections of the book to try to mount into one song eventually, one tune. So there really is no distinction between writing a memoir and writing fiction. I do the same thing in fiction, and the book that's coming out from Turtle Point Press, my wonderful publisher, in the fall, Cold Moon, is a hymn, really. It's a hymn to life, love, and responsibility, and it just plays the tune. It plays the songs that go along. I make no claims for the form. It's just something that I feel comfortable in. There's a wonderful songwriter, lyricist, Alan Bergman, who with his brilliant wife Marilyn wrote "The Way We Were" and "What Are You Doing the Rest of Your Life," and a lot of standards that we know. And Alan said to me once that he hears the words in the music, and that's where the lyrics come from. And I realized when he said it that I hear the music in the words, so that when I write, that's what comes out. It's a long-winded answer to your good question, Ike, but I guess the one reason that the memoir appeals to me is that memory is an act of faith. And so it comes as close to fiction as one can do in life and still believe you're telling the truth.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's, I don't believe that either one of you are therapists, but it does seem like, and Erica, you talked, some of what your description of this project reminded me of is that people often journal therapeutically, right?
Yeah.
And in addition to, for leaving documentary evidence. And Alan, Roger, a lot of your writing feels therapeutic to me. You think, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I pity the patient.
I
I realize the tone, but you're right about the tone. You are right about the tone.
Yeah, it feels very revelatory. I suppose that's what memoirs are, right? That's what memoirs do. But I wonder if either one of you have any thoughts about journaling at a time like this as therapy or as record keeping.
Or as an act of generosity. I always think of writing, and you're always writing for a public. And so that means you really want to think well of the public. You want what you do to do some good. And to keep a journal in this time, I'm not doing it, but to keep a journal in this time would seem to have the potential of doing a lot of good. Even if you just write the facts. I'm a great believer in writing the facts. Just write what you see in the streets. These horrendous, really mad scenes on beaches where people are in some sort of hedonistic frenzy, not caring as if they live or die. And then you contrast that to the breathtakingly heroic people who work in hospitals, who are careful as they can be. I busted up my shoulder recently, and so I was in a hospital. And I felt a little foolish, actually, because I busted up my shoulder. So what? I'm looking around at all these people in peril and these amazing nurses and doctors attending them. One byproduct of this time is that nurses really have come into their own. People really realize what an immense gift nurses give to society. So you have these people on the one hand. This is your journal. And if I were keeping a journal, I would write down what I saw in the hospital and what I saw on a beach in Alabama or Jersey or wherever it is, where people are saying, in a sense, this is the mask of the Red Death, come and get me.
So it's interesting that you mentioned a therapeutic quality, because we just went live today with it, and we hadn't done any promotion, but we've already had 11 people respond and start filling out the forms. And we've had people from, I think the youngest is 16 and the oldest is 77. But at least 3 of those responsive have said, directly remarked in it, how therapeutic it was. And I think what it is we're living in, although we're supposed to be socially distant and we're, hunkering down at home, we're still living in this incredibly chaotic universe. And to stop for a minute and be still and quiet and reflect on what's going on in our lives is, I think, really powerful. And for people to start to think, just to give themselves the time and the space to think about the grief and the anxiety and everything else that's going on, but also about the tremendous beauty, like Roger's talking about. Different things emerge from this. There's both horrible things, but also really extraordinary moments of kindness and beauty that come out of these really unimaginable situations. And that's what I think is interesting.
It's a wonderful observation, Ellen, because we are all stunned in the depths of our grief or terror, how suddenly beauty intrudes. Mm-hmm. And our heads snap back, and at least we get a glimpse of the other side of life.
Yeah.
It has been a joy for me to see like everyday people. You mentioned nurses, Roger, like everyday, like grocery store clerks, like, elevated to this status of hero. They're really putting their lives on the line, for us, for society. And
isn't it interesting, Ike, along that line, how adaptable we little animals are? few months ago, we're strolling along the street, wondering about your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your song, your drink, or whatever it is. A couple of weeks pass, and we have adjusted. We just turn on a dime to be able to try to survive ourselves and help our neighbors survive. I hope we do it, obviously, but in my long life, this is its most impressive moment.
Mm. That was a commonality that we've seen so far in the responses, is that people talking about this kind of endless generosity of friends and neighbors, or people who maybe didn't know each other that well before, but now we're checking in to see if anybody needed anything, especially if they were concerned about people going out for whatever health or age reasons, and really a sense of community that's coming out of this extraordinary situation.
And if you're keeping a journal, watch the things that Ellen is talking about and write as carefully as you can about what you see. The first role of the writer is to make the reader see. Let the reader see every detail of what's going on in the streets, in the homes, in the hospitals, even on the beaches and so forth, so that nothing is lost on the senses that will tell future generations what was going on here.
Erica, are you journaling? Are you keeping a journal?
Well, I had plans. I had the best of plans. But, you know, I'm a journalist, so unless I have a hard deadline, I'm going to procrastinate. I'm not so, I did try, and it's funny because this morning I actually looked at my journal and I was like, oh, I made 2 entries. But it was very interesting to see the progression of thought and how moving from the stage of like, oh, panic buying, how do we source everything that, you know, we need to have in the house, to moving forward to like, okay, I'm going to go spend some time in the garden and put my hands in dirt and feel okay about things. But one of the things that I was thinking about that's been extraordinary that this has done is also because we've moved to this virtual world that we're talking about earlier, is this kind of authenticity and vulnerability that we see in people, because we're seeing people in their homes, and then all sorts of, you know, kids come up, and, you know, you're at a work meeting and there's an animal and there's a kid and there's all this other stuff, and so the idea of being professional or expertise or whatever that is kind of drifts away, and you get to see the full humanity of the people you know in a very different way, and that's been, I think, just a real gift.
You know what I've gotten a kick out of? I've gotten a kick out of watching folks on television who always show up made up in front of us.
Yeah.
But they're not made up now. They either they can't be or they choose not to be. I think they look 1,000% better.
Yeah.
You know, Eric and I were talking yesterday about, you know, we're in a profession that attracts introverts. And so I think there is something to what you're saying, Erica, because working this way now, and I mean, you know, this is the way I normally work. I'm in my office at the library, but my house looks very much like this when I'm working from home. You know, I never have that many people into my house, you know, so it really does force you to open up in a way and make yourself much more vulnerable than you might have been, in multiple ways, not just the letting people in, but, you know, but letting people in here as well.
Yeah.
Very good.
So, interesting. So I wonder if there are questions over here in the chat or in the Q&A. So Roger, Janine says she used to work with you at Time and wants to say hello to you. So.
Well, Janine and I remember a world in which, and Ellen is familiar too, we didn't have much of a choice in terms of getting our work done. You could procrastinate just so long, but this magazine came out once a week. And Janine may remember how inept I was. I never pay attention to the news. I still did. Oh, now I pay more attention to the news than I ever did in my life before. But of course, I was working for a news magazine, so that was something of a liability. And I would walk in the morning, since I was the essayist, one of the essayists, wonderful Lance Morrow was another essayist, and Frank Tribbett. We had a great crew of guys and women. But since I didn't know the news, the editor, who was a very gruff guy, Ray Cave, would say to me, "Well, Roger, what do we think of that?" I have no idea what that was, what he was referring to. But the chances of it being good were so minimal. I would always say, "Terrible, just terrible." And then I'd run to find out what he was talking about and write the essay. But at the end of the day, you had to show up with some piece of prose.
So someone here is sharing let's see, where did it go? Julie is sharing a great memory of you, Roger, at the Public Library Association meeting in Boston, having a blast handing out copies of your book. Do you recall which book that was? And
I don't, but it sounds self-aggrandizing enough to be me. Yes. Having a great time handing out my own book.
I think many of us wish we could do that. So, and what else? So there's a question about, and this is a question that we traditionally ask at the beginning of the book group that I lead at the library, where before discussing the book that we are about to discuss, we actually go around the room and introduce ourselves and talk about a different book. So people want to know what folks are reading during the pandemic. Are you reading anything noteworthy?
I'm ashamed. Ellen is going to come out the star of the class, and I will be the dunce. I haven't read for pleasure in a very long time. I sometimes accidentally find it. I reviewed a book for the New York Times Book Review just now, Roddy Doyle's new book, and it was really very good. It wasn't as good as his first one, but it was good. And since then, I had to really concentrate, so I read that for pleasure. But most of the time, I'm just a shoplifter. I read, I see something that gives me an idea, I can use it, and I do. So I'm the worst person to ask about such an experience. I will meander into the true experience of reading that you two have. But in the last, God knows how many years, I'm a disgrace.
How about you, Erica?
I'm not far from that. I haven't been a super reader during this time, but I have been reading. What I've started and been working my way through is Donella Meadows' Whole Systems Thinking, which turns out to be perfect for this time, because whole systems thinking, of course, is what happens when you don't consider an entire ecosystem and you only are considering about little parts of it. And it ended up being the perfect book for right now.
And for the book group that I'm leading, I feel like, since nobody has access to their physical library, that we're choosing selections from our always available online collections or things that are freely available online. So we just had a great, very interesting discussion of Emma by Jane Austen, which was a nice diversion. I didn't inflict the Journal of the Plague Year on them or Camus yet, but depends on how long this lasts.
That would be a great book for you to write, Ike. Emma in the Journal of the Plague Year. What does a girl who just loves social life do now?
That's right. That sounds like one of those Quirk books, right? Have you seen these books? Do you know Quirk Publishing? So Pride and Prejudice and Zombies is one of the books. No, so in next month we are actually discussing The Moonstone, Wilkie Collins.
Ooh.
That is a great novel.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So here are some more. So people are disagreeing with you, Roger, about
never.
They say you're charming and never self-aggrandizing.
Oh, that's okay.
Okay. A couple questions about the Leaving Our Fingerprints. So people want to know what responses have been put up so far. You addressed that a little bit. And Otis says that his camp is in Speculator, which is a member of the Southern Adirondack Library Association. He's thinking how rural and wild that is and how intrusive and appropriate the virus and quarantining must feel like if you are one of the few year-round residents. Especially, I think, after this holiday weekend where everybody came north.
Yeah.
So I know it is making people nervous. And Jennifer says she works as the archivist at a small public library in southwestern Pennsylvania.
Hooray!
And is doing something similar along the same lines as you, Erica, working with our state library system to do so. I'm very impressed. You already have 11 survey participants.
Oh.
What tips might you have for encouraging people to share their thoughts and experiences during this time? I think it's part of the challenge currently is that people are growing weary of the situation, and I think that is true.
Well, the first tip I would say is find an online book festival and weasel your way in to promote your project. No, I was really surprised. We were hoping to launch like a week or two ago, but we had some tech issues related to power outages. And so I was like, but I'm supposed to talk about this and we don't have anything. So I've been very happy that it's gone so quickly. But I think that I do a lot of work with communities, helping people figure out what they want to see happen in the world. And I think that a lot of times it just depends on the questions you're asking and how that resonates with people. And so we did spend a fair amount of time thinking about what sort of questions we were asking. And it's a mix of kind of some, please tell us like what's going on in your heart, along with like, hey, how are your pets handling this? To just kind of like mix it up, but give people a chance to really share what they're doing. And I think people are growing weary of the situation, but I think that they still have a story to tell. And I'm also hoping that we're going to get we're fortunate in that this year's summer reading program thing for people who are in the library world is Imagine Your Story. So I'm hoping that we're going to be able to push this out and get a lot of kids to participate through the summer reading program. So that's
great.
What we're thinking about, yeah. Because we want to hear what the little kids think, yeah.
In line of kids, Erica, it's funny, and we were talking about how times like this can bring out not necessarily the best in you, but the most generous imagination in you, because you start thinking of your position with others. And I volunteer in the Children's Hospital in Stony Brook. I don't do much. I'm kind of like a therapy dog, but not as appealing. But I just walk around and talk to the kids and write down their stories. But now in a children's hospital, not just in Stony Brook, in children's hospitals all over the country, you have to remember their parents can't see them. Or if their parents come to see them, then the parents have to stay there, which means they don't work. So it's an isolable experience. So I got Paul Harding. I have 3 colleagues on my faculty. Paul Harding won the Pulitzer for Tinkers. Incredible guy. Incredible.
Such a beautiful book. Such a beautiful book.
Paul Harding, Genevieve Crane, who just won a Whiting Award, a young woman who was, again, just fallen on the floor, brilliant. And Lindsay Atkins, who won an Amy Award and is also brilliant and wonderful. And the 4 of us, just this week, recorded videos that we're sending to the Children's Hospital about writing. And we're giving them prompts,
love it.
Erica, we're giving them prompts, just look at this and write something from it. If I get a chance, I'll let Ike know, and therefore indirectly let you know how the project went, because we just started it. But I've got high hopes for it. I would love to see it catch on and say to these kids, literally, you are not alone, because they are absolutely.
Oh, I love that. Plus, the magic of kids is that they're so unfiltered. Like they're going to tell you exactly what it is, and they have these great ways of expressing things that they haven't been told what not to say or how not to express themselves yet, so they can really be free with that. So I would love to see what comes out of that. That sounds fantastic.
The little musical play that I did last summer that I guess I'm going to do a couple more times, called Lives in the Basement, Does Nothing, comes from my granddaughter. My wife and I lived with our grandchildren when our daughter died. We lived there for 7.5 years in the lower level of the house. And I used to go over to the local public school where the kids went and talk about writing. And so one afternoon I'm there, and my granddaughter Jessica introduces me to her 4th grade classmates thus: "This is my grandfather Boppo," my grandparental name. "This is my grandfather Boppo. He lives in the basement and does nothing." Couldn't fault her for accuracy.
Oh, one of the favorite things I've seen this week is a picture posted to the library's Facebook page of some children playing library story time. So,
Oh,
That is so great. Think of the parodies available to them.
no. All right, so some more from the chat over here. Jennifer, our librarian friend from Pennsylvania, says she's worked with one of her local high school English teachers who has encouraged probably about 50 or so of her high school seniors to prepare essays, poems, etc. for
fantastic.
submission. That's great. For the library archives. Hasn't seen the submissions yet, but can't wait for it. That sounds pretty terrific. And then Steve has just shared for everyone a link to purchase The Story I Am from Northshire Bookstore. So Northshire is, along with the library, a founder of the Saratoga Book Festival, and they are terrific library partners and huge supporters of the reading and author community here in Saratoga Springs and in Manchester, Vermont. So just a terrific organization that we're super proud to be associated with. Christian shares that the people should check out your video, Roger, at the Gaithersburg Book Festival.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Christian. I just did that the other day. I was glad to do it. I'm glad you liked it.
So, Roger, something that you shared with me recently was a video of the commencement you gave for your students at Stony Brook. Did you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I thought it was a fascinating parallel between, here we are having this conversation in a way that, 6 weeks ago, we never would have imagined that we would have done.
Absolutely. And the three of us are like-minded on this issue. No, it just was a notion that dropped in my lap that virtuality is the writer's wheelhouse. We do this. This is what we do. We live in a virtual world. We create virtual characters, virtual thoughts, virtual plots, and a virtual life. And now suddenly in this dreadful, perilous time, virtuality has come into its own. The difference being, and this is why I was talking to our graduates, that you graduates, traffic in virtual prime, that is the virtual sublime, that we make the best of something that is not real. And so you want a king and you get King Lear, and you want a distraught woman and you get Anna Karenina, you got and or to go back to Emma or any of the great heroes and heroines of literature are all virtual. They never were, but then we do something with virtuality and we say that the life that can be imagined, to go back to Erica's thought, life that can be imagined can be the life that is sublime. And that's our business in the world. That's at least that's part of it. The other parts, frankly, and I never shirk from this because I believe it wholeheartedly. A writer's business is to make the world better. Make it smarter, make it feel more, make it happier, or make it more intelligently sadder. Whatever thought is at the disposal of words, the writer's duty is to make the world a better place. And this is now a wonderful time to exercise that responsibility.
That sounds like almost the perfect place to end our conversation. So, I mean, not that I don't wish that it could go on, but that sounds like a perfect summary thought there. And I appreciate your being here and participating in this, both of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ike.
So I wonder if does Ellen want to come back for a minute or and say anything or?
I don't know if she has sound capable.
No. All right. Thank you. I mean, and Alan really is the driving force behind all of this. And so I really appreciate the work that you've put into this to bring this book community together. And I'm hoping that we will be able to do it in real life sometimes. So, all right. So thank you, everyone. Have a terrific evening. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Roger, so much.
Thank you, Ike and Ellen.